Good afternoon. Welcome to the 2020 OASFA Counselor Workshops. We are so glad to have you with us today. My name is Maura Lee Keller, and I am the Director of Technical Assistance at the National College Attainment Network, and I will be your host and one of the presenters today. I'm going to ask my co-presenter, Jackie, to introduce herself. Jackie?
Good afternoon. My name is Jackie Adkins. I am the Assistant Director of the Student Resource Commons at Ohio University Southern in Ironton, Ohio.
Thanks, Jackie. Again, thank you for joining us today. We hope that you will find this workshop helpful as we have entered the financial aid season a couple weeks ago, and so everybody is in prime FAFSA completion time, so we hope will find the information here helpful. We will invite you to ask questions throughout the webinar. You should have a question/chat panel on the right-hand side. We please encourage you to put your questions in that, type them in the question box. Some we will attempt to address throughout the webinar. Others we may hold the question to the very end to make sure that we can cover everything. So please feel free to put your questions in. You all are muted throughout the webinar today, which is why we're going to need to use the question box. That will help cut down on the background noise, etc. So please feel free to use the question box. This webinar is being recorded. A recording of one of the presentations will be available on the OASFA Counselors page on the OASFA website, but we will not be posting the webinar until after the last one of these workshops is concluded on December 9th. So we strongly encourage you to take notes, jot down any web addresses that you see throughout the workshop so that you can have those resources handy. We have lots and lots of resources up on the counselor page for OASFA website, which we're going to talk about closer to the end of the workshop. Also, you can get a certificate of attendance today if you would like. Please make sure if you stay for the entire webinar, then you can email us at outreach@oasfa.org and request a letter or a certificate of attendance for today's workshop. So we will be happy to provide that if it's something that can help you in your professional development requirements. So let's go ahead and get started. Our first slide is just about OASFA. This is the State Financial Aid Association. We are happy to continue to provide information and materials to you all. If you do choose to take things down off of our website and use them for your students or parents or provide the links, please just choose to mention that the resource was created from or provided to you by OASFA. Our outreach email address is at the bottom of this slide, so jot that down in case you are going to request a certificate of attendance for today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the agenda and all the different kind of things that Jackie and I are going to cover today. We're going to do some FAFSA updates. We're going to talk to you about the federal verification process. We're going to talk to you about financial aid award letters and the variations that happen in those. We're going to spend probably more time than normal on the special circumstances topic because we happen to be in a very unusual year where lots of people are having significant changes in their income, and we want to make sure everybody understands the implications and how they can ask schools to address that. We're going to talk about updates to the federal aid programs. We're going to provide information regarding the state aid programs, and we're going to talk to you about resources. So we hope you will find a lot of this information helpful as we go through it today. So first, the FAFSA updates. Let's talk about what our parents and students need a little bit before they get ready to start their FAFSA, and that is parents and students need to have an FSA ID. And here is the web address where parents and students can go to set up their FSA ID. The FSA ID, as we know, is a username and a password that can be used to access all types of the federal databases, but in particular can be used on the FAFSA, and it becomes the legal signature on the FAFSA. So this will allow parents and students to complete the form online and not need any version of a signature page to be mailed. The student and the parent each need their own individual FSA ID. In an ideal world, the parent and student should request these or get them set up before they start the FAFSA so that they will be ready to go and kind of won't have to stop in mid-process and set up an FSA ID. It does require an email address or a mobile phone number so that the information can be verified. So those numbers have to be, the phone numbers have to be different phone numbers, the email addresses have to be different email addresses for the student and the parent. So that is critical in terms of setting it up and making sure that it will be a good, clean FSA ID. We do have a note here that parents and students with recycled cell phone numbers may need to reach out to FSA. The FSA ID has been around for enough years now that people, cell phone companies have started to recycle cell phone numbers when people get new phones for the first time. And so there have been situations where someone went to set up their FSA ID and put in their cell phone number, and the system pops a message back to them that tells them that that cell phone number is already in use. And so that may require some outreach to federal student aid to explain the situation and let them provide some assistance in terms of the FSA ID being set up. Okay, and we strongly suggest that students don't use their high school email address because many times upon graduation, those email addresses are deleted, and federal student aid does continue to send communications via email to FAFSA filers. So we would strongly recommend that they use, perhaps a Gmail or some other type of email address. All right, FAFSA on the web. As we know, FAFSA.gov, www.fafsa.gov is where students and parents can find the FAFSA form. This is when they go to the website, it may look like, the web address may look like studentaid.gov, and of course they're going to want to apply for financial aid and click on that, and the FAFSA screen will pop up. When they start the FAFSA, now it always asks who's starting the FAFSA, what role are you, and so you're going to indicate whether they click that I am the student or I am the parent role, and that will sort of dictate the way and the manner in which the screens will come up for completion. So you do have to indicate who is starting the form there. For those of you who've been in the counseling role and have done a FAFSA before, the great news is that there literally is not a single question change from the FAFSA last year to this year. They made no changes in the questions. The only thing that they did do is there was a question on the form that asked if the family filed a Schedule 1 with their tax return. Last year, everybody who completed that question had to answer it manually and click yes or no, depending on the appropriate exceptions for the question. Starting this year, the Schedule 1 question will become part of the questions that can be transferred from the IRS. So we will talk a little bit about the IRS data retrieval tool and transferring information from the IRS directly into your FAFSA. But the good news this year is that if you do use the IRS DRT, the Schedule 1 question will be automatically answered for you. And when you look at the screen or when the student aid report arrives, you will see by that question transferred from the IRS if that's the way that you filled in your information. For those families that are not eligible to use the IRS DRT, the question will still be able to be completed manually. And there were just a couple changes in terms of the exceptions of when you could say yes or no to filing a Schedule 1. So capital gains has been removed as an exception, and virtual currency has been added as an exception. So other people refer to virtual currency as Bitcoin. So there are a couple exceptions where if you did file a Schedule 1, if it was for any of the reasons listed in the instructions, the family will still be able to indicate no, that they did not file the form. Another update this year, not exactly on the form, but you may have heard of the Auto Zero expected family contribution calculation. For families who now have an income of $27,000 or less, for 2019 will be considered generally for the Auto Zero EFC, and they'll have some questions eliminated with skip logic on the form, and they will end up with a zero EFC. There were a couple line item changes on the tax return, so the instructions have a couple differences, but they didn't really change the questions. Again, we strongly encourage every family that can use the IRS DRT to do so. And we know sometimes it's a frustrating experience because you have to type in the address exactly as it appears on your tax return, et cetera, to make sure that your FAFSA matches your tax return. This year also, last year they combined the question about untaxed portions of IRAs and pensions, and this year they split the question back out again. So again, no new question, just worded a little bit differently and separated into two instead of one. Okay, let's take a little peek at how Ohio students did, particularly the class of 2020, with FAFSA completion numbers. When we took a snapshot look last month, as of September 11th, when we took a look across the country, nationally, the class of 2020 filed 4.2% less FAFSAs than the class of 19. So FAFSA completion was down nationally for the class of 20 compared to the class of 19. Obviously, we believe some of that would be due to the pandemic that struck in March and students who may have been late filers or maybe got off track to heading to post-secondary. Only one state in the whole country had an increase for the class of 20 versus the class of 19, and that was the state of Hawaii, who had like a 0.2% increase from this year compared to last year. In Ohio, we didn't fare as well as the national number. Our Ohio class of 20 was down 5.7% compared to the class of 2019. In the state of Ohio, that means we had about 4,700 less seniors this year complete the FAFSA than the class of 2019. But the good news is that Ohio has always been a really good state with their overall FAFSA completion rate. So as of September 11th, we had the 15th highest FAFSA completion rate in the country, with 64.3% of our class of 2020, or over 77,000 FAFSAs, were filed by the class of 2020. So Ohio does a really good job, so hats off to counselors and access programs and financial aid administrators who all make sure that those entering students get their FAFSAs completed. You can imagine or see how well we would have done. We were down 5.7%, which basically means almost 70% of our class would have completed this year if we had not dropped in the number of FAFSAs. Ohio did pick up FAFSAs between June 30th and September 11th. Over 6% of the high school class basically filed their FAFSA over the summer, or prior to when school started this fall. So the good news is that they filed over the summer. The better news would have been if they would have gotten everything taken care of prior to the end of their academic year. When we take a look at all of the FAFSAs in Ohio, for our incoming students and our returning students, Ohio was down 3.3% in the number of FAFSAs filed by all incoming students as well as the upper class compared to this time last fall. That means that over 17,000 less FAFSAs were filed. Unfortunately, what we know is FAFSAs are a very strong indicator of the likelihood to enroll. So, while we'll need to wait a little bit longer into the fall for the National Student Clearinghouse to put out the official numbers for fall terms in terms of enrollment, we can probably anticipate that enrollment numbers will be down for this fall compared to last fall, which I think within the current situation, we can understand all different kinds of situations that have contributed to that. Just to give you an idea, when students file their FAFSA, for this year, students who entered college this year, new filers, you can see that about a fifth of the students send their FAFSA to more than 5 schools. Another 21% send it to 2 to 4 schools, but almost 57% of the students who filed a FAFSA, even as an incoming student, are only listing 1 college. That's kind of interesting to know that the freshmen are that single-minded about where they will enroll. When we take a look at all filers, of course, that single filing number jumps way up over 78%, which makes sense because you would assume most of the current students hopefully are going to remain at their institution and not be jumping around, but there's still upperclassmen who send it to 2 to 4 schools or even 5 or more folks who may be considering transferring schools. Okay, there are different ways as counselors and access folks that you can track information about your students who file the FAFSA. My organization, NCAN, puts out what's referred to as the Form Your Future FAFSA Tracker. This is the big national snapshot that is updated every week with FAFSA information. So since we are now in October and the new FAFSA for 21-22 academic year opened, this tracker now contains information, and you can jump in there and see a snapshot at the national level, the state level, and you can also go in and filter down to your city or your district or an individual school building and take a look at the number of FAFSAs that have been filed. So this is great when you're looking for trends and comparison. This really gives you the national, the state, and the local perspective. Probably one of the most useful tools for school counselors is the student level reports that are provided through the Ohio Department of Education. Many of you may be getting your student level data reports, which will actually provide the names of the students who have completed a FAFSA. Here is the website. This is a really critical website. We strongly encourage you to write this down if you are in a district that has not been regularly accessing the reports to know which of your seniors have filed the FAFSA. You can go onto this website. It actually prints out the roster of the schools whose superintendents have signed the data sharing agreement. So first you can get on to see if your superintendent has already signed the data sharing agreement. So if you find your district listed there, that's great news. What you then need to do is follow up and make sure that you have access to the data, because you can have multiple people from a district given a username and password to get in to the data to access reports. So most critically, your superintendent has to sign a data sharing agreement, and then you can designate the people who have access to the FAFSA data. So we strongly encourage you to do that. And the site will be coming up with the 21-22 data, FAFSA data. The good news also is the state of Ohio has invested a significant amount of money within the last year to do a lot of enhancements to this system. So we think you'll find it more user-friendly, and you'll find it with some additional information about the students who filed. So we really strongly encourage you to use this, particularly this year, as you're going to need to do targeted outreach to make sure that your students are getting their admissions applications and their FAFSAs completed. I'm going to stop because I think we've got a couple questions that we're going to take a chance or take a moment to answer. It says the between June 30th and September FAFSA FAFSA info is confusing. I didn't think the FAFSA opened this year until October 1. That's correct. The FAFSA for next year opened October 1. However, that June 30th to September 11th data was about the class of 20 who would have been enrolling in college this fall. So that data was about the 2021 FAFSA. So what we're saying there is students who graduated in the spring, who may not have finished their FAFSA before the spring. There was over 6% of the graduating seniors who did a FAFSA over the summer so that they could enroll this fall. So hopefully that's helpful answer. Here is a screenshot. If you go to Form Your Future, we've modified it a little bit for this year, but you can see how you can tell which states are in the lead for the most seniors completing the form. This screenshot shows you, this was as September 11th, so you can see here how Ohio was at 64.3% of the seniors, and the number of seniors that filed the FAFSA compared to the overall number of seniors in the state. So that's what we meet in that Form Your Future tracker can be used for comparisons. And then you have the opportunity at the bottom of that web page to click to do comparisons at the state, local, district, and building level. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about federal verification. One of the things that we know happens when students file the FAFSA is a percentage of the students are going to be selected for a process called verification. That basically means that the families are going to have to provide documentation related to the information that they put on their FAFSA. The Department of Education's most recent statistics will tell us that roughly about 22% of students who file the FAFSA get selected for verification. What we do know from our organization and other research is done that proportion of students selected is highly imbalanced in that the students with the lowest EFCs with the algorithms that the department uses are selected on a much higher basis than those with high EFCs on the form. So oftentimes the students who are the neediest and therefore going to qualify, for example, probably the Pell Grant and maybe our state grant here in Ohio, are going to seem disproportionately selected for verification because those are the students receiving the largest grant dollars from the federal government. Students have to stay on top of being selected. As you know, when a student gets a student aid report, there will be a sentence on the cover page that tells them they've been selected for the verification process. There also will be an asterisk in the upper right-hand corner near the student's expected family contribution. For our high school seniors, this can be a lot of work. If they are applying to multiple colleges, there's typically a set of documents that they're going to have to complete. One is a verification worksheet that the college produces. They will probably look different. They may ask the same questions, but they may have different logos or layouts or graphics on the form. They're also going to be required to attach either a federal tax transcript or a federal tax return. And as you know, the families will be using the 2019 income when they complete the FAFSA. So hopefully those taxes were due July 15th or October 15th if they filed an extension. So that's the information that they will be using. One way to help avoid, it's not 100% guarantee that you won't get selected for verification, but the likelihood is greatly reduced if you use the IRS DRT to transfer your income information from the IRS into your FAFSA. You have a lot less likely chance of being selected for verification. So that's why you will always see us promote so heavily the use of the DRT. If folks worked, parents or students, but didn't earn enough dollars to file a tax return, then the school may need a copy of their W-2s that they got for the year. The other thing that can happen is if you were a non-filer, if you're a parent who was a non-filer, or an independent student who was a non-filer and you're selected for verification, you may be requested by your college to submit something called a verification of non-filing letter. That is a form obtained from the IRS. There is a request form. It's called a 4506T. It's the form that you can use to either request your tax transcript if you filed or the verification of non-filing if you did not. So families may need to get that 4506T filled out to request the verification of non-filing. Now, just like most agencies, the IRS has not been processing paper forms because people are working at home. So these may be things that you can go online in terms of the tax return transcript and request it if you can meet the criteria to request it online. The other thing that colleges are doing is accepting copies of 2019 tax returns, or they have created their own version of a non-filing statement that a parent or an independent student can sign. So here's the mention again about collecting a tax return or the tax transcripts with the information about how to access the tax transcript online or requesting it to be mailed. The tax transcripts will only be sent to the tax filer, so they will have to turn around and send a copy to the colleges who are requesting the verification information. If for some reason someone files their FAFSA now and indicates that they will file their 2019 taxes, first of all, it's very likely they will probably get selected for verification because the deadline dates have passed for tax filing. Schools have to verify that the student and parent did or did not file. They can only accept extensions beyond the standard 6-month for HEROES Act or an IRS letter of approval. So at this point, most every family should have filed taxes. Please note that the federal government selects folks for institutions, but also or select students for verification, but institutions also have the right and the ability to select students for verification. Sometimes you will run into the colleges that will just automatically select 100% of students for verification. And so everybody who is applying for financial aid is going to have to provide tax transcripts or returns or verifications of non-filing before the institution will process their financial aid. An important note about verification, a lot of times family feels like, oh, what did I do wrong? Or I must have done something wrong on my form. And that's really not the case. It is just a process to help verify information that was submitted. The financial aid administrators, you're turning all your documents in. They're not necessarily tax experts, but they may know when they spot something that requires a family to maybe make an adjustment in the taxes they were filed. One of the most common examples we see sometimes in this category is a family chooses to do their married filing jointly tax return or married filing separately, and somebody marks that they're head of household. So with rare exceptions, choosing head of household filing status is not applicable to most married couples. So when that happens and a financial aid administrator comes across a tax return or tax transcript with that type of filing status for someone who's married, they probably will not be able to complete the verification process, and the financial aid administrator may be mentioning to the family that they're going to have to maybe refile their taxes and do an amended form with a correct filing status before the aid administrator is going to be able to finish verification and award the student any aid they're eligible for. So let's talk a little bit about financial aid award letters. We're in the FAFSA filing season now. We're probably handful or more weeks away before institutions perhaps start to send out award letters to students. But we get a lot of questions about award letters. Students and parents oftentimes have a lot of questions about award letters. So we're going to kind of walk you through some samples here and point out, some good things that you want to look for and things that happen when financial aid award letters arrive. We hear a lot of times that the award letters are confusing, and there are those are legitimate feelings by students and parents because colleges deliver award letters in different ways. Some post them in portals, some send emails with links attached, some still print and mail paper versions of award letters, particularly to their incoming students. So different institutions make that information available in different ways, and that can be confusing. The other thing is when you print out award letters, if you printed them all out and had them laying on the table, they're all probably going to look formatted in different ways. Their layouts or their templates are going to be different, so you won't necessarily find the same information in the same location on the award letter. The other thing that happens is that colleges tend to name the same aid programs with different names. For example, here, we know that the student loan is the cornerstone of a lot of financial aid packages, and so it's probably going to appear in almost every financial aid package. You may see that loan for an incoming student called everything from a subloan, a direct subloan, a federal direct subsidized loan, and people will begin to wonder, are these different? They're called different names on different award letters, and unfortunately, they're not. In some cases, colleges choose the names for the loans, by the number of character spaces that are available on the templates of their award letter. So they may not be able to fit a full title like a federal direct subsidized loan. And they're going to have to make some abbreviations or shorten things so that it will fit their award letter templates. And that can be confusing to families that things have the same loan programs or the same aid programs have different names on different award letters. The other thing that is people always wonder is, are these awards automatic, or is there different things I need to do? Is there any action we need to take? And so sometimes you have to look and see how clear the parameters are on the letter, or if you're sort of looking at the computer screen because it's posted up in a portal, does the school provide all the necessary information? Is there some type of supplemental document that there's a link to that they tell you to read, all the terms of all the different award, aid programs? Do some institutions require you to check an accept or a deny or a reject box? So those are the other things that can make these confusing. How the school deals with federal work study. As we know, federal work study for most students is a part-time job. They'll have a limit for the year on the amount that they have to earn, but it is a job, and it usually requires turning in a timesheet and things like that. And so work study dollars are often not available to help pay the bill at the institution, when fall term fees are due or spring term fees are due. So although work study is on the award letter, you kind of have to subtract it because it's not going to be available to help pay bills. Some colleges package Parent Plus loans. So it's the student's financial aid award letter, but they list a Parent Plus loan on there, which is a parent borrowing to help with the expenses for an undergraduate student. There are private education loans that are available through certain banks. So families and students have an opportunity in some cases to borrow privately in addition to what may appear on their award letter. And some colleges have entered into income share agreements, and those may be offered to the students. Are there changes on the letter? If so, are they estimated or actual? Look at the language, because if verification, for example, is not complete and the financial aid office came out with an estimated award letter, you may know that those numbers can change after verification is complete. And do they include things like on the award letter, if they tell you direct charges, or indirect charges, which may be books and supplies and things like that. So let's take a look at some sample award letters. Now I know the print is small. On the next few slides, we're going to blow up some of the sections. But here's an example of 2 different award letters, 2 different layouts, some different names. So we're going to take a look at these more in depth. But you can see the example on your left. It's a financial aid award letter where they've listed all the types of aid that the student is eligible for. They've totaled it for each semester, and they've given you a grand total for the year. They do have a note there that the work study earned is based on wages and hours worked. So that's kind of the way for them to message. And there's a link where you can get additional information about work study. This school then lays out for the student the expected costs. So you see tuition and fees and program fees, room and board if they're going to be on campus, the estimation for books, miscellaneous transportation and personal expenses. So it shows you the anticipated cost each semester plus the total cost for the year. Then this award letter does some math for you, and the anticipated costs minus the aid. So the estimated remaining cost in the first term, it is $4,499.50. So the basic thing that a family has to understand from an award letter like this is there is approximately $4,500 in cost per semester that is not covered by any form of financial aid. So that's either going to need to come from, the expected family contribution or additional income or savings from the family, maybe outside scholarships and things like that. The example on the right, again, they grouped in this one all the scholarship and grant aid together in the top section. They then broke the student loan information out into its own section. The third section contains work study, and there is a mention of that optional Parent Plus or a private loan that may be needed to cover all the costs. So they've done some math at the bottom in terms of what will I pay for this year without loans. So if somebody doesn't want to borrow, it's showing you the estimated tuition and meal plan. It's showing the total amount of scholarships and grants, and it's showing that there's a balance of $11,385 before student loans. So if the family wants to cover the full $11,385, so that the student doesn't have to borrow. But if the student takes the standard incoming freshman loan amount of $5,500, it does show the family has a remaining balance of $5,885 for the year that is going to have to be paid. And there is that suggestion up in the third box that that could be covered with a plus loan or a private loan. So here we can take a little bit better look at these award letters. You can see in terms of scholarships and grants, often referred to as gift aid. When you see a list like this, looking for the word scholarship or grant, which should hopefully signify to the family that those are gift dollars or free money that will not have to be repaid when the student leaves school. The second example, again, highlights scholarships and grants, and that school put it all in one section so that you could see the grand total of all of the gift aid that a student was going to see. So these are some examples of some better award letters that do break things out, have pretty full names, and hopefully some clarifying words that will help families understand free money versus loan money. When there are loans, that is usually obviously subsidized and unsubsidized. Any loan that is subsidized indicates that the student does demonstrate some financial need, and therefore that $3,500 they can have as a freshman, the interest will be covered while they are in school. The unsubsidized loan, to get the additional $2,000, the interest does begin to accrue on unsubsidized loans when the student begins their term. So you can see examples, 2 different ways it was broken out and 2 different ways that it was named, but the same dollars for the student. And then here's kind of highlighting a couple different ways that work study. The top example indicates available federal work study earnings, right? So trying to send a message that that much is available, but not necessarily going to be credited to the account. The second school indicated that it's aid that needs additional action, because in many cases, students are going to have to look at the work study openings and find a position for themselves on campus. Now, again, both schools tried to give a message to the family about what amount would be remaining after all aid is taken into consideration. So good award letters will have this kind of information on it. Oftentimes, one of the biggest complaints is that these actual costs, or having the subtraction problem done for you, is sometimes not available on some of the award letters. And so families are having to add up the total cost and add up the aid and do the subtraction problem themselves. And so sometimes those are the award letters that don't quite contain everything that would be as helpful to a family. One good thing that OASPA does provide, and it's available on our website, is if you're looking for a tool, you can go to our website and download the cost comparison tool and maybe hand that out to your students or parents. And this is kind of just a really good form where they can take, do 3 colleges at a time, put them on there, fill in the information from the award letter, and do the subtraction so that they can understand what will be our out-of-pocket expenses, for example, in column A, column B, or column C, and that may help families make decisions regarding, which institution they'll end up choosing based on cost and, fit and match for the institution. All right, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Jackie, who's going to talk to all of you about special circumstances. So Jackie, all yours.
Thank you, Morley. And hello again, and we'll give Morley a little break from talking, and I'm going to take over for just a little bit. We're going to start with special circumstances, and you can move on, Morley. As we have mentioned, the 2021-22 FAFSA does require 2019 income, and obviously due to current circumstances, that may not be a true reflection of a family's financial situation right now. And of course, I have families ask me all the time, why do I have to include the 2019 income? Because that's not my current income. And obviously, the schools have in place a process to allow students to tell the schools what these circumstances may be on a case-by-case basis. With documentation, the schools can go back out, make some changes to the FAFSA that may increase the student's eligibility for financial aid. And special circumstances are conditions that exist but cannot be explained or documented on the FAFSA. And just a few examples that we'll look at on this slide are a loss or reduction of employment, wages, and employment compensation. Obviously, that's the one we probably see the most at schools, but it can also be loss of untaxed income or benefits, such as child support. Maybe the student has aged out. They've either, once they've graduated from high school, or they turned 18, that child support ended, but they had it that full year of 2019, but it ended. That's a change that can be made with a special circumstance. Possibly a separation, a divorce, or a death after the FAFSA was submitted. Next slide, please. Before presenting a special circumstance to the college, students must first file the FAFSA as directed. So a lot of families get confused by why they need to do that, but they will need to go ahead and do the actual FAFSA with that 2019 information. And of course, most colleges will have an appeal process to address these circumstances. The student should complete the appropriate appeal form, which may include an explanation of the change in circumstances, documentation to support their statement, such as layoff or termination letters, tax returns, W-2s, pay stubs, other sources of documentation that they may have, or anticipated income they may have. An estimate of future or of current income, and then the college will review it and determine if this would impact the student's eligibility, and they'll make the updates to the FAFSA. And I always, of course, encourage families, because every school may have a different process, make sure you check with that individual school, because they may call it a different name, which we're going to look at some of those later on, and may have different documentations and ways of completing the form that the student or family may need to do. Next slide, please. And of course, if the student is applying to more than one college, they may have to do several different appeals, because each school will do their own processing of a special circumstance. So if they're wanting to know early about where they may stand, and of course, we also mentioned that schools may not be ready to do special circumstances right out of the gate once that FAFSA is available. So they may have to wait a little while before they can do that with the school, but they may be looking at, depending on how many schools they're still considering, they may be doing these special circumstance forms for several different schools. Now, if they've made that final decision, or if they want to wait till they make that final decision on that school, they certainly can do it just with that one institution. Appeal decisions are at the discretion of the university's financial aid office and are final. So if that school, they've done it, the family has sent in the information, maybe the school comes back and says this is the change that it will make, or maybe there wasn't enough change to make any change to their amount of financial aid they were receiving, obviously they would deny the appeal and not move forward. But that can't be appealed to the U.S. Department of Education. That decision is final once it's made. Students, if they're selected for verification, which we talked about earlier, they must complete this prior to that appeal being reviewed. So they have to get all of those documents into the school. Some colleges may even require a student to complete verification on income and household prior to reviewing an appeal, even if they were not federally selected to start with. So if they applied for financial aid, they weren't notified they were selected for verification, the school may come back and ask them to go through that process before doing the change of income or special circumstance. Obviously, due to our current situation with COVID, schools are preparing for an increase in appeals based on losses of income in 2020. So the schools are anticipating that they're going to see many, many more appeals coming into the schools, obviously due to our current situation with the pandemic. Next slide, please. While the FAFSA for 2021-22 was available beginning October 1, financial aid offices may not be prepared to discuss the appeal process until later in the year or early part of 2021. Just to get their forms together, their information together, sometimes it might be after the first of the year. But the student, the parent, can contact the school and they'll let them know when that process will begin. Most colleges will have appeal forms on their website or portal and may be titled differently. So every school may call this process something different. So you might see an expected family contribution appeal, an income appeal, a special circumstance appeal. I know here at Ohio University, we call it a change of income. And we actually don't keep the form on the website. We have the student make that request so that it's not out there where everybody that maybe really doesn't need it, would have access to it. But again, that is something that every school may be doing something differently with that form, calling it something different. But if a student or a family calls the school, says, here's the situation, the school's gonna, kind of direct them in what they need to do to start that process. There is a free resource to assist with a special circumstance appeal. So on this website, there's templates to help students with appeal situations. So what type of appeal are they doing? And again, I always like to reiterate that it is very important for the student, the family, to check with that financial aid office at the school they plan to attend, just so they know that they're getting everything in that they need to get in to do this special circumstance appeal. Next slide, please. So just some examples of special circumstances that you may see. Probably the most common, obviously, is a loss of income or employment by the parent, but there's other things that may fall under this umbrella. So unusual uncovered medical or dental expenses, so things up and beyond past what maybe insurance coverage is covering for that family. If they have those extensive medical or dental expenses, they certainly can turn that information into the school. Loss of child support, we talked about that one earlier. So if there's a child support that has stopped, that family can report that. Extraordinary dependent care, maybe they have a child, that's maybe has a disability, maybe they're taking care of an elderly parent and they've got some extra expenses going out for that purpose. They certainly can report those. Parent or spouse death, obviously things are going to look very different for that family, so they can also report that. And of course, in a situation of divorce, they maybe filed the FAFSA, or they had to use that 2019 income and obviously then got divorced. They filed the FAFSA including both parents' information, and then there was the divorce that happened. So those are all special circumstances that that family can report to the school, and at that point the school can direct them on what they need to do and what they need to provide. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to be moving on to aid programs. Next slide. First, we're going to take a look at the federal aid programs that are available to families. So those are going to be Pell Grants, the Teach Grant, campus-based programs, and direct loans. So we're going to, on each slide, we're going to break those down. So next slide, please. So the federal Pell Grant for the 2020-21 year did have a small increase, and that generally happens each year, that the federal government will approve a small increase. Of course, we don't know what that will be yet for 2021-22 yet, but $6,345 was the maximum award for a full-time student and an expected family contribution of 0. The maximum expected family contribution for Pell Grant eligibility did increase to $5,711 for the 2021 year, and it's not yet established for 21-22, but there generally is a slight increase in the amount and generally a slight increase in the expected family contribution, but those numbers just aren't available yet. Next slide, please. Continuing on with the Pell Grant, students have a maximum number of terms they can receive the Pell Grant. So 600% of an annual award amount, or the equivalent of 12 full-time semesters. So basically 6 years is what they allow a student, if they're Pell Grant eligible, to receive the Pell Grant. A couple years ago, the federal government did go back to approving the year-round Pell Grants. Students can attend on a year-round basis and receive up to 150% of their annual award. So if they go full-time in the summer, the fall, and the spring, they're basically using a year and a half of their Pell Grant eligibility. So this was something new a few years ago that the federal government decided to do, because in the past, students, if they came in the summer full-time, they came in the fall full-time, they didn't have any eligibility for a spring semester a lot of times for the Pell Grant. So that did remedy those students that want to come year-round. And it did serve as an incentive to complete their credential or degree, in a more timely fashion. They still have the 12 full-time semester limit for the Pell Grant, even when they go year-round. So obviously, if they're using 3 semesters a year instead of 2 semesters a year, that money is going to go a little bit quicker. So if they're going year-round, that they'll see that aid, that Pell Grant eligibility dwindle a little bit faster. Next slide, please. The Teach Grant is also another federal grant, and if anybody wants to know what that stands for, it's the Teacher Education Assistance for College and Higher Education Grant. That's a lot to say, and as you know, financial aid likes to use lots of acronyms when they're talking about the different types of programs. But for any 2021 Teach Grant first dispersed on or after October 1st of 2020 and before October 1st of 2021, the maximum award of $4,000 was reduced to 5.7% or $228. The grant of up to $3,772 per year to students who intend to teach in a public or private elementary or secondary school that serves students from low-income families. There is a service requirement upon graduation that has to be met, or the grant does become an unsubsidized direct loan that must be repaid. So that's the kicker right there, is that students will have to repay the Teach Grant if they don't meet the terms of their agreement to serve. They also complete a counseling that explains all of these types of things to them about what they'll have to do upon graduation to fulfill the terms of the Teach Grant, so that it doesn't become an unsubsidized loan with all of that interest added in that would have to be repaid. So students, obviously, you know, freshman year, they think they want to be a teacher, they take the Teach Grant, they don't fulfill those requirements, they're going to have a unsubsidized student loan that does have to be repaid when they finish school. So it's a big consideration for, obviously, students to take in case they obviously change their mind, which, as we know, students do when they get in college, they sometimes go a different direction. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about two campus-based programs that exist. That's the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, or you'll hear schools refer to that as the SEOG, and also the Federal Work-Study Program. And these amounts can vary significantly between colleges and universities. So like Morley talked about earlier, doing those cost comparisons, and you look at an award letter, you might have 2 or 3, 4 different schools that are going to have different amounts on there because they are awarded by that college or university specifically. Priority deadlines can impact eligibility between schools. So priority deadlines are important when filing the FAFSA. So we do encourage students to meet their first priority deadline of each school that they're applying to for federal programs. And every school, again, can have a different date. And at Ohio University is January 15th. There will be many schools that will be a lot sooner than that. And I do know on the OASFA website, there is a sheet that lists those priority deadlines. So if you haven't accessed that, I would encourage you to get that and maybe have that handy for your students. And I know some schools can possibly be, as early as some dates in November. So those dates are coming up, rather quickly for some schools. For most schools, federal work-study earnings are given in a paycheck form and not applied directly to the student bill. So generally, students are going to earn a biweekly paycheck that they receive. If they want to cash it and use it to help them pay toward their tuition and their costs at school, they certainly can do that. But generally, it's not going to be applied directly to that. The student is going to earn that money. Next slide, please. Continuing on with federal work study, it is awarded to undergraduate or graduate students. It can be on or off campus employment. Federal work study wages are excluded from the EFC calculation, so it doesn't count against them when they complete the FAFSA each year. Those are excluded. The Ohio minimum wage in 2020 was $8.70 an hour. I believe that's been approved, but that may go up a little bit, probably not a whole lot. And there is a difference between work study and work or employment on an award letter. Keep in mind and remember that work study is a need-based federal program, so the students are receiving that based on information they reported on their FAFSA. Some institutions could possibly list campus employment on an award letter. Some may not, but if it's listed on there, it generally is obviously just an opportunity that they may have. It's usually non-need based, and they usually will still have to do something to apply for that job, turn in an application, maybe a resume or whatever to be able to get that position. But keep in mind, there's a difference in that work study or that work or employment that's on that award letter when the student is looking at that. Next slide, please. The federal SEOG. Undergraduates with exceptional financial need or Pell eligible students with the lowest EFC will generally be the students that are awarded this SEOG opportunity first. Keep in mind, also goes to students that have met first priority deadlines at the institution. The award ranges from $100 to $4,000 depending on when the student applies. financial need, and the funding and policies of the school attending. So I know here at Ohio University Southern Campus, as an example, the regional campus students are not awarded SEOG, but we have a regional higher education grant that's a campus-based aid awarded to students in place of the SEOG. So generally, schools may have differences. If they're a regional campus, maybe a community college, they might have some different opportunities for students at the regional or community-based level. Next slide, please. Moving on to direct loans. Undergraduate students, this was for the 2020-21 year. May not see a lot of changes. We may see a few changes happen with the interest rate. They are considerably low right now, but obviously they might go even lower considering the circumstances. But they are two separate unique types of loans that are awarded separately. So the subsidized undergraduate, it is need-based. So it is awarded based on that information from the FAFSA, that basically when the student falls into that need-based range. The interest is fixed at 2.75% for new undergraduate loans dispersing during the 2021 year. Interest is subsidized while the student is in school and during deferment. So that means the students are not having to pay the interest on that loan as long as they are enrolled at least half time. On the other side of that, unsubsidized undergraduate direct loans, they are not based on financial need, which means no matter how high that family's income may be, a student can still receive unsubsidized loans to help with their college education. The interest is also fixed at 2.75 for all new loans dispersing during the 2021 year. Interest accrues from the time of disbursement of the funds. So the main difference in those two loans, the subsidized loan, interest basically is not accruing on that. The student is not responsible for it while they're at least half time. The student with an unsub loan is going to either opt to pay that interest possibly while they're in school, that would be encouraged, or that will accrue and they'll have to pay that when they go into repayment. Interest rates recalculated annually and are effective July 1 based on the 10-year Treasury note index plus of 2.05% and is capped at 8.25%. So you can see right now interest rates are very low. Moving on to next slide, please. Direct loan amounts that were awarded for 2021 have not changed. To be honest, haven't seen those amounts change for a long time, so I anticipate they'll be the same for the 2021-22 year. But as you can see, freshman students, their maximum sub amount is $3,500. They can get an additional unsub for $2,000 and for a total of $5,500. Obviously, freshmen, that's their maximum amount. So that doesn't go very far, depending on how expensive that institution may be. You can see for sophomore year, the subsidized does increase by $1,000 once they reach sophomore status. And then juniors and seniors max out at the $5,500 sub and the $2,000 unsub. So, and again, that subsidized amount is need-based. So, some students may see less in the sub amount, and it might be supplemented possibly by that unsub amount. Undergraduate independent students and dependent students whose parents have been denied the PLUS loan can be eligible for additional direct unsub loan in the student's name. So if the parent tries to get a parent loan to assist the student, and the parent, because they have to be credit worthy to get a parent loan, if they're not eligible, then the student can come back and be offered some additional money in their name. And that additional on top of whatever they're already getting, maximum sub, maximum unsub, can be an additional $4,000 as a freshman or sophomore, an additional $5,000 as junior and senior. Now, if the parent completes the PLUS loan application and they are eligible for the parent loan, the student does not have this option. This is only for those students that otherwise, because their parents are not eligible for the PLUS loan, they're not going to penalize those students and not allow them to have some additional help to pay for their education. Next slide, please. Just briefly talking about graduate students. I know most of you will not be working with graduates, but graduate students are only eligible for unsubsidized loan. They're no longer eligible for subsidized loans. They're strictly the unsubsidized type. They are not, again, based on financial need. You can see that the interest rate is fixed at 4.30% for the loans during the 2021 year. Of course, the interest will be accruing. And of course, they have higher limits when they're in a grad program than they do in an undergrad program. So you can see there to the side what graduate students are eligible to receive. Next slide, please. Briefly talking about income-driven repayment plans. They do have right now lots of options for students to set their payment plan up once they graduate based on their income. There's actually 4 different ones that are income driven, and you can see those listed there. Most students that that are on standard repayment plans, which is just the one they put most students on if the student doesn't choose one. We see probably the most students defaulting on that one because obviously it's the higher payment because they're trying to get them paid off in the 10-year time frame. So a lot of students don't realize that these plans are out there. So they are available. You can see the 4 different ones. We really encourage students to work with their loan servicers, find the best one for them, but not just not repay their loan. Obviously, we don't want to see students out there defaulting on their loans. Obviously, lots of negative repercussions for the student that defaults on that student loan. These plans are designed to give students peace of mind related to the affordability of their student loan repayments. So a lot of students you'll find will ignore these loan repayments and default on their loans, and then they have a lot less options than they would if they stayed in touch with their loan servicer and worked to get those loans repaid in a timely fashion and on time. Next slide, please. Public service loan forgiveness, or loan forgiveness for public employees, for teachers, and under this program, if they make 120 or basically 10 years worth of qualifying payments on these loans, while simultaneously employed full-time by a certain public service employer or nonprofit employer. So they do have some guidelines to meet to be able to qualify for this. It is for loan borrowers under the William D. Ford Federal Direct Loan Program, which is the program that's in place now. The FELP program that used to exist, which was students at one point had a choice between the 2 loans, but right now all students are receiving direct lending. And there are rules that they must follow. So they'll work with their loan servicer to find out what all of those guidelines are to meet that. And basically, if they do, any part of their loan after the 120 qualifying payments, basically that part of their loan gets forgiven. Next slide, please. The Federal Parent Plus loan is the loan that's available to parents to assist students with paying for college. It is, of course, for parents of dependent students. Loan limits are up to the cost of education, less any other financial aid received. So it's kind of one of those last things that's put on that award letter after possibly Pell Grants and scholarships, student loans, and things like that. If there's any difference that's left in that cost of attendance that needs to be met, then the family could possibly get a parent loan. Interest rate is 5.3% fixed. Repayment begins within 60 days of full disbursement. Payments may be deferred while the student is in school. So I can remember years ago, it didn't matter. As soon as that loan dispersed, those parents had to start paying that, but there are some deferment options available to parents now. And of course, FAFSA completion is still required, even if just like it would be for any type of other financial aid. Next slide, please. So we're going to move on to state aid programs. And the first one we will look at is the Ohio College Opportunity Grant. Next slide, please. And as you'll see, we have another acronym here. We do refer to this as the OCOG. The students to be eligible need to file the FAFSA. They do have to be an Ohio resident They do have to attend Ohio Public University main campus. They also can attend an Ohio private nonprofit college or university, or attend an Ohio private for-profit institution. And as you noticed on that list, one of the types of schools that weren't listed were regional campuses and community colleges. And a few years ago, they did, due to budget cuts, also generally regional campuses and community colleges being more affordable, they did pull the OCOG from regional campuses and community colleges. So only students that attend university main campuses with, of course, meeting the other qualifications are eligible for the OCOG. Next slide, please. So still continuing with OCOG, the expected family contribution, or that EFC, is that index number for awarding the OCOG. The EFC eligibility range is from 0 to 2190 and a maximum household income of $96,000. A part-time student will receive a prorated amount, so they can still get it as a part-time student. Students are limited to 10 semesters or 15 quarters of state need-based grant aid. Can receive the grant if attending on a year-round basis. So some of the same qualifications that you look at with other types of federal aid. Next slide, please. So here's the example of how public institutions, private nonprofit, have awarded students the OCOG. And as you can see, the first two there, community college, regional campus, of course, is showing 0. Those schools have not received that funding for several years. Other main campuses, if the student goes full-time, maximum of $2,000, and you can see the breakdown if they go part-time. Private and nonprofit, a little bit higher for private nonprofit, $3,500 if they're full-time, and then it's broken down from there. Private for-profit, you can see the amount there and then the breakdown from there. And there are certain schools in Pennsylvania that also qualify students for the OCOG, and you can see how those are broken down depending on the number of hours they are enrolled. The state budget did not allow for an increase for 2021 year, but right now, we'll be waiting to see what that looks like for 21-22. Next slide, please. Foster youth at community colleges with OCOG. Qualified foster youth at community colleges continue to be eligible for OCOG for the 2021, or they were for the 2021 year. It does require that for otherwise OCOG eligible students, their living expenses are to be added to their tuition/general fees to determine their OCOG award amount. Qualified foster youth should receive a letter from the Ohio Education and Training Voucher, or ETV, program that lists their ETV award. Could be eligible for the 2020-21 maximum public OCOG amount of $2,000. So foster youth, even if they're at community college or regional campus, could still possibly have the opportunity, if they're eligible, to receive the OCOG, where most other, all the other students would not. Next slide, please. One other thing I'll mention back on the foster youth, again, they should always check with the school, obviously, the institution they plan to attend, to see what is available at each institution. Okay, next slide, sorry. Moving on to Nurse Education Assistance Loan Program, or what's referred to as NELP. Loans for RN candidates and graduate nurse faculty students. Recipients must serve as a full-time nurse in Ohio for 5 years to qualify for 100% of loan cancellation. Annual awards for most recent academic year, $1,620 a year, or $6,000 a year for a student in a Master's of Nurse Education. So again, just another possible assistance in the state of Ohio for nursing students. Next slide, please. The Ohio War Orphan and Severely Disabled Veteran Scholarship. The Ohio War Orphan and Severely Disabled Veteran Scholarship Program awards tuition assistance to children of deceased or severely disabled Ohio veterans who served in the armed forces during a period of declared war or conflict. To be eligible, students must at public institutions will be funded 100% of tuition and general fees, and at private institution will receive an annual award amount of $8,575 for the year. So this is a great program for those students that qualify. I mean, for those students that do receive this scholarship, it's, you know, at public institution, it does pay 100%. So that's an awesome benefit for them to have. So, you know, if students are eligible, definitely encourage them to check into that. Next slide, please. Ohio National Guard Scholarship. Eligibility is determined by the Ohio Adjutant General. The current annual full-time award is 100% of tuition and general fees at all Ohio public college and universities, or the equivalent amount at private institutions for members of the Ohio National Guard. For approved private or proprietary degree granting institution of higher education, the program will pay $11,016. Another great benefit to those students that have eligibility for this program to definitely take advantage of. Next slide, please. The Safety Officers Memorial Scholarship. This is for Ohio dependents and spouses of safety officers killed in the line of duty. The current annual full-time award is 100% of tuition and general fees at all Ohio public colleges and universities. The current annual full-time award for students at eligible private colleges and universities, both the nonprofit and for-profit, is $8,451. Great, again, another great opportunity for those students that would qualify for that. Next slide, please. Choose Ohio First. Various program with STEM concentrations, personalized projects and coursework tied to colleges or local business. Individual awards will vary from college to college. Partnerships of private/public schools apply for funding. For example, public community college and a private four-year institution. And there's more information on the ohiohighered.org website. This is actually the website that will take you directly to that page to tell you a little bit more. One of the things I did find when I went to the site was some frequently asked questions. So what is it? Who is available to receive it? So it does have information, lots of frequently asked questions that kind of give more information about this program. And again, a complete list of state grants and scholarships can also be found at ohiohighered.org/SGS. So that's another place students can go and do research on all of these Ohio programs that we've been talking about today too. Next slide, please. Okay, my final slide is going to be talking about the Ohio Education and Training Voucher Program. Again, this is in place for foster youth. It is federally funded and a state administrative program that foster youth may qualify for. They may receive up to $5,000 a year for qualified school-related expenses. This is the website where they can find that application and basically find out all the items that may need to go along with that. To qualify, they must be a current or former foster student who was in foster care on their 18th birthday and aged out at that time, or was in foster care, legal custody, or guardianship to a kinship caregiver at or age 16, or adopted from foster care with the adoption finalized after their 16th birthday, or foster care case was closed between the ages 18 and 21. So as you can see, they do have to meet some different guidelines to qualify for this program, but it is still an awesome opportunity for those students to check into and see if they have eligibility. And that is my final slide. I'm going to turn it back over to Maura Lee.
Great, thank you very much, Jackie. Before we talk about resources, we'll do a reminder to type any questions that you have into the question box on your screen, and we're going to address those once we finish the resource section. Tanya, you typed a question in about getting in contact, and so I need a little bit of clarification. So if you could add a little bit more detail to your question, we'll be able to address that as we get to the question section. So when it comes to resources, there are lots of things out there to help you as a counselor, students and parents, etc. What you're seeing here is a screenshot of the FAFSA Help Ohio page when you go to the OASFA website. So you can see there the different choices. The two most common tabs that we would expect counselors to use are the resources tab, because there's a drop box there and a specific page that is designed specifically for counselors with resources that we really think you can use, and the FAFSA Help Ohio page, which contains a drop box that has two choices there. One is around the FAFSA calendar events, and then also resources. So OASFA does have a calendar that's out there available to the public, in which you can post your FAFSA event. So if any of you are going to be hosting FAFSA completion events, we would encourage you to go to the website and fill out the form so that we can get your event up on the website. You get to indicate if it's restricted to the students from your school district or open and free to the public. This year, of course, we've added the virtual option. You'll be able to tell us whether your workshop is virtual or in person. If it's virtual, if there's a registration link, etc. The portion for parents and students contains a lot of information about how to fill out the FAFSA. And so we know it's going to be tougher this year. Not everybody's in school. You can't run down to the counselor's office all the time and ask questions. So there are a lot of good forms, instructional videos, etc., all on the parent and student resource page under FAFSA Help Ohio. So we hope you could, take this link, put it up on your website, do anything you can do, because this could be a great tool for your parents and students as they're trying to get their FAFSAs completed. So we strongly encourage you to share that link, as well as complete, the form. The federal government also does, a lot of resources. You can view and download them from studentaid.ed.gov, and the resources tab there. You can pick the topic, you can pick the type of resource you're looking for. Right now, that resource page, just to give you a heads up, still contains information about the 2021 FAFSA, which is for the students who are currently in school this year, as well as resources for the 21-22 FAFSA, which will obviously be used for next year. So just be careful when you're downloading the resources, that you make sure you're grabbing them for the correct year as you want to utilize them with your students and parents. The Department of Education really doesn't print resources, anymore and mail them. A lot of the documents or resources you can download are PDFs, and they're available to you electronically. And then if you want to download it and print off multiple copies, or simply provide, a link to those resources from the federal government, that would be helpful. So you are attending one of our workshops today, so thank you very much. We appreciate that. We do have 3 remaining workshops coming up, in 2 in November and 1 in December. So if you have a colleague who was not able to be on the webinar today, we strongly encourage you to send them to the OASFA Counselor Resource page, where the registration links will be up for the remaining workshops, and we would love to have them join us for the future workshops. We are recording this webinar, and it will become available, but unfortunately it's not going to be available until after the December 9th workshop, and we will then post the recorded version of the webinar, and then you can access that if you need it. So, but please encourage your colleagues to join us. One thing that many folks are still doing, because the schedule, it was just a tough start to the school year. There are many high schools that are still holding financial aid information nights. If you need a presenter, OASFA is happy to help you find a financial aid presenter. What we have seen by far is the predominant number of requests that have come in are for virtual presentation. So either your school has a Zoom account or GoToWebinar or something like that, and you're going to set up a financial aid night for students and parents to attend, and you need a presenter. All you have to do is go to our website, fill out the request a financial aid night presenter form, and submit that to us, and we will see if we can't identify a financial aid officer from around the state to be the presenter at your workshop. One other thing that we have done to help you out in this virtual year is on that counselor resource page, there is also a pre-recorded financial aid night, as well as the PowerPoint deck that goes with it. So the other option you have is to download that presentation and perhaps play it for parents, or put the link up or send the link out to parents and students so that they could click on that link and listen to a pre-recorded financial aid night presentation. So we're trying to give you all the options that we can this year to help you. The other thing that we would love for you to do is, if you're not already in there, please go to the counselor resource page and click on the College Access and School Counselor database and get your contact information in there. That is how we send out reminder notices about workshops like this, or any information that we have there that we think is important to get out to counselors and access folks. So please, if you're not currently in the database, or if you've changed schools or changed email addresses since you put yourself in there, please go into the database on our website and make sure that you are in there with your correct contact information. We strongly encourage you to ask your colleagues to do the same thing. We would like to get that database as robust as possible and have lots of counselor contact information there. One other thing I'm just going to go back and hit that's available on the counselor resource page, Jackie covered it. There is the deadline date sheet. We have done a lot of outreach to most of the 4-year colleges in Ohio. We have a bunch of the 2-year colleges that have FAFSA priority deadline dates. So you will find that Ohio deadline date sheet there on the resource page. So we strongly encourage that you download that or provide the link to your families if they're wondering, what's the date that they have to get their FAFSA filed by. I will do a reminder that you can have a certificate of attendance for coming to the workshop today. So please email us at outreach@oasfa.org and we can send a certificate of attendance to you. Make sure your full name is included in the email so that we can put that on the certificate and get it back to you. At this point, we're going to take a look at some of the questions. You still have time to type your questions in the box again. Jackie, the first one we have is, could you briefly describe the Parent Plus Loan program again? So do you want to, give them sort of the details related to the Plus Loan program?
Sure. The Parent Plus Loan, again, is for parents of dependent students. So when they're filing the FAFSA, those obviously most high school graduates, depending on if they've got special circumstances, have to use parental information. So any students that basically are considered dependent when filing the FAFSA. Loan limits are up to the cost of education, less any other financial aid. So when the school puts together the financial aid award package, they send it out to the student. Again, like we looked on the award letters, some schools include the Parent Plus Loan, some schools were not. And if it's not listed, the family can come back and say, hey, we would be interested in this additional loan. But it is awarded up to the cost of attendance. So if the cost of attendance at the institution is $20,000 for the year, and they have $18,000 in other types of financial aid, then that family would be eligible for that $2,000 up to that cost of attendance. The interest rate is fixed at 5.30%. Repayment begins within 60 days of full disbursement. Payments may be deferred while the student is in school. So as long as the student is attending while they're in school, that parent could qualify for deferment and not have to pay on that loan at that current time. Now, if they opt that they want to go ahead and pay on it, they certainly can while the student is in school. And the families do still have to do the FAFSA, just like they would for any other type of financial aid. they would need to complete the FAFSA. One of the main differences between a student loan and a parent loan, students do not have to be credit worthy for the direct loans, but parents do. So if the parent is not eligible, they go through the process, they decide not to get an endorser, cosigner for their student loan, and they say, we're not going to do that. You know, we would like for our child to be offered that additional unsubsidized loan in their name, then that's an option that student would have at that time to possibly get some additional loan help based on them rather than on the parent, because the parent didn't have the eligibility for that Parent Plus loan. I'm not sure what part of does that cover? Is that covered?
Yeah, that should. I mean, you covered. Okay. Yeah. Kieran said thank you. So obviously all the details that you provided. Just a reminder that you can type questions in about any information that we covered today, or if you have general financial aid questions, Jackie and I are happy to try and answer those questions. So please feel free to type those in the question box, and we will attempt to address those. Because at this point we have answered either during the webinar or just now the questions that have been typed in so far. So we'll give you another few seconds. The other thing that we will remind you is that you will have an evaluation for today's webinar emailed to you. So we strongly encourage you to complete the evaluation. We read those very thoroughly every year from the school counselors and try to make the appropriate kinds of adjustments to the counselor workshops that we offer. So we are strongly encouraging you to complete the evaluation that will be sent to you upon conclusion of the webinar. At this point, we're not seeing any additional questions. Well, thanks for the compliment. Jackie, we're fantastic. So thank you very much. We appreciate that. If there are no further questions, we're going to thank you all for coming today. Again, encourage your colleagues to register for one of the remaining workshops. Please fill out the evaluation form, and we hope you will find all the resources that we've put up on the OASFA website valuable to you and your parents. So thank you for attending today.